wait, are you going? Okay. So, hi everyone. I'm Morgan Blakey, and I'm doing my project on colorism past versus present. And today I have these lovely ladies with us today, and these are all people who are a part of my family. I have my aunts, my mom, and my cousin. And so if everybody wouldn't just mind going around and saying their name and where they're from and yeah.
Hi, I'm Tracy Davidson, and I am Morgan's cousin, first cousin, and I am from Carmel, Indiana, and I still reside in Carmel, Indiana.
I'm Erica Blakey, and I am Morgan's mom, and I live in Carmel, Indiana.
I am Morgan Blakey's cousin, and I live in Santa Cruz, California.
Hello, my name is Stephanie Gardner, and I'm Morgan's aunt, and I reside in Fishers, Indiana.
My name is Sister Paula Livers Powell, and I am Morgan's aunt, and I'm an adjunct professor of African American history, and I reside in Indianapolis, Indiana.
Okay, so today I brought you guys just to interview you guys over the topic of colorism and your guys' experience with it, or if you ever seen it, and also just to learn more about how do you feel if the Black community can overcome this this issue, or do you feel like it's something that's going to take a while for the Black community to overcome? So my first question is, so what does colorism mean to you?
So I'll start. So, so colorism, I think by definition, if you were to Google colorism, it typically talks about, discrimination or prejudice against individuals with darker skin, typically within the same ethnic group or community. But for me, I would say, to add on to that, it could also be the opposite. I think discrimination or prejudice as well within the same ethnic group against lighter skinned individuals as well could be considered colorism. So, you have the definition, but then I would also, add on to that. So we could kind of go both ways.
I feel that the practice of colorism is when people favor the lighter skin, whether it be male or female, over darker skin people in the Black community. But colorism can also be in any ethnic or racial group of people, not just necessarily the Black community.
As both ladies have said, it can colorism is an issue in the Black community, and it's also in other ethnic communities as well. But I definitely think that it's an issue that has some historical background, especially in the Black community, in terms of us coming here from Africa as slaves, and then just things that took place in the plantation experience that kind of created some of that division. And so whether colorism is something that we experience now, I think a lot of it has some historical background to it.
I would just like to say that just piggybacking off what others have said about the whole notion of colorism is a fairly new construct, probably the last 20 years of the recognition of colorism, because from a historical point of view, colorism generated from our arrival here in America and the miscegenation of the African American experience in America, to where you would have light-skinned Blacks or dark-skinned Blacks, but that was all related to the caste system of enslavement, that the closer you were to the white race, you may have gotten privileges, but that's not necessarily so. Colorism in the 21st century to me, has taken on a whole new narrative about colorism, because in the Black community, we are a rainbow of colors. And so to say in a family, you know, I'm discriminating because someone's light skin or dark skin, that's a whole nother scenario. But if you're talking about in terms of discrimination, colorism is going to be a very complex issue that will be faced in the 21st century, not only in the Black community, but just like my sister was saying, a lot of ethnicities, because now it's a new term, colorism. I didn't grow up with that term. So yeah, so it's good to be able to explore this, you know, concept even further.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with everything that's been said. I think the only things I would add is that you can't talk about colorism without talking about white supremacy and anti-Blackness, which is a lot of the reasons why there is prejudice against people across the different spectrum, because again, people come in all shades, all shapes, all colors, and that's true within the Black community as well as many other communities. But when you start to look at who is treated or I would say better differently and why they're treated differently, a lot of times it does have to do with these ideas around what is considered good. And usually what is considered good is whatever is closer to that idea of what is white, even if that's not necessarily objectively better.
Okay, thank you for those like responses. Those are really well thought out, and they really added a lot to, you know, my perspective on colorism and like what I've been researching, you know, just like just adds more to that and like, you know, shaping what colorism like is. But then for my second question, it's basically so have you ever experienced colorism? And if you did, how did it make you feel?
I don't know that I've ever experienced colorism, although I know that it existed. I went to Fisk University, and that's a university, a historically Black college university. And often, like people would say, people that went to Fisk, you had to be the color lighter than a brown paper bag. But that was back in the time when Fisk had first been established. A lot of light-skinned people went to Fisk. However, if you look at their history and yearbooks, I mean, that's not necessarily so, but there was probably a significant amount of people who may have been in a privileged class, you know, the more affluent, and they happen to be light skinned. But did I feel like when I went to school that people were saying, oh, I don't like you because you're light or not light or dark? I really didn't experience that. I mean, like I said, colorism, racism, probably more so than colorism, has been more paramount. That would have impacted me. But in terms of just feeling like people are looking at me differently because of the color of my skin, because like I said, in our family, you know, we're all different colors. Our mother is very, very light skinned. And, you know, in our family, we have all different shades, as you can see. So, but just on a personal level, I can't say that it impacted me to where I felt like, oh, I'm being discriminated because of within my community. I'm being discriminated against externally, that I could talk about, but that was my impression with colorism.
I would have to agree, Paula. It seems like most of my experiences have been more racism as opposed to colorism. However, I think that, as you said, this is kind of a new term, colorism. I feel like it's something that it's always existed, but we just didn't have a name to it. Maybe couldn't even articulate what it was, even if we felt that it was happening until now. So I'm sort of glad, to your point, that it's a term that we can talk about now so that we can kind of explore more about what it is, thus we can start to try to address some of those things. However, I have a little bit more empathy for, I think, younger people now when it comes to colorism, because for me, for many reasons, I feel like colorism seems to be a bigger issue now than it seemingly was. Maybe is why we don't seem to have so many examples that stand out to us that were maybe traumatic or, you know, from colorism versus racism. It seems like colorism is something that like the youth or younger generations are experiencing more today. And I have empathy for, you know, a lot of our young people, particularly a lot of our darker complected, particularly women. Because if I'd be honest, it seems like the darker skinned young women seem to kind of get the brunt of the, you know, the bad part of the whole colorism end of the stick. And I could give a lot of those examples just from my experience of working with and mentoring youth over the past, you know, 10 years or so. So it sort of saddens me, and I hope that it's something that we can work through. I don't really have any particular experiences, but when I start to think about things that go all the way back to, as you spoke to, Aunt Paula, the paper bag thing, you know, we go back and think about some of the sororities back in the day. This, well, you can't be in the sorority if you don't pass the paper bag test. I mean, well, that's colorism. I mean, we didn't call it that back then, but that's colorism. So many may have experienced it, but just didn't know what the name of that was. So I don't know, you know, I just had a lot of confidence coming up as a brown skinned, you know, young woman. So if it did happen, maybe it didn't shake me, but I do see how it does impact a lot of brown young girls now today, unfortunately.
Well, I'm a little older, and I will say that I experienced colorism. I'm I'm same age as Tracy, and I'll say that because I remember when I was in elementary school, there was a girl who was darker than me, and she would pick on me on the bus, and I didn't really realize why, but now that I look back, um, I just remember her saying things to me about me being light skinned. And so I do remember that, but I probably didn't know what it was. So as you know, you made your point earlier that it can go both ways. And even as I was an adult, I remember encountering another individual who I felt didn't like me for the fact that I was light skinned and would just make little comments, and even made a comment that they had bad experience with light skinned girls when they were younger. So that's why they didn't like people who were light skinned. So it kind of made sense. So I didn't really, you know, I kind of feel that that was an example of colorism, but I didn't know that's what it was. And I'm an educator. I've been an educator for 29 years, and I can agree with the statement that Tracy made, that you can see today, especially for a lot of our young Black girls, they struggle with their color, whether they are, some of them light skin, whether they're brown skin, they struggle because there is something in our society that is beginning to say that because you are Black, because you are a Black girl, that you are not to be chosen, that you are not that standard of beauty, whatever that is. And unfortunately, I'll just be honest that, you know, some of our young men in our community have even kind of aided and abetted in those feelings that our young ladies have, because they have decided that that is not their choice. And so that makes it a little bit difficult. And I feel like young ladies, I know young men deal with it too, but I feel like our young girls have really bared the brunt of some of those things as it relates to colorism and its impact on their self-image, on their confidence. So I just think that's something that right now is a big thing that is a lot of our young ladies are dealing with.
Agreeing with what my sister Paula said, when we grew up, so we're in a different generation, it was more racism that we experienced than colorism. And so, like you said, we didn't even know what the word colorism was. And so I was a school social worker. I retired from the school system. I heard a lot of stories from girls, from our Black girls, their experiences, which I had no, I mean, I couldn't even relate to it because I never grew up with that. And so maybe it might be more prevalent now because of social media, the TV, that colorism has come out. So like I said, it probably existed. I just didn't have any experiences with it. Not to say it didn't exist, I didn't. And so I just think that it's more prevalent now because of social media and the TV and more access to the issues in the Black community.
Yeah, I guess I'm supposed to wrap up as another generational perspective. And I think the most important thing, our most important theme, is that we have a word for it, something that's probably always existed, and persists in a lot of different ways. I honestly can't say, I can't recall a particular experience when I really experienced colorism, but I'm sure I've been both a bit like benefited from it, but also like been, you know, negatively impacted from it, because the other thing with colorism is very situational. In some spaces, I am going to be on the lighter side, in other spaces, I'm going to be on the darker side. And it really just depends on like where I am and how that's perceived. But I think the thing is now, particularly at this age, I can see the impacts of colorism, even if it doesn't necessarily change my life directly. I can see it when I look around. I'm like, okay, who is put up as, you know, even with like, it comes like Black people, who's put up as like a role model? Like, who are we meant to look up to? Or when I look at TV, like I've been watching a lot of The Different World recently. I'm like, a lot of these actresses are lighter skinned paired with darker skinned men. There are a few darker skinned actresses, but like, you know, those roles aren't always the main character or the love interest. You can look at, so you can see that in media, you can see that when you think about like who is, you know, elevated in certain spaces, what do they look like? What about them is praised? What about them is kind of acknowledged as the thing that you should look forward to? Even if their skin color or their hair texture or their body shape isn't mentioned, those are usually factors in what makes them a person who is put forward. And so what I found is to be important is to ask the question about like, why this person who isn't here, who else isn't being represented? Especially because, you know, when I look and I think about the people I'm around, particularly like the Black people I'm around, even our family, again, all colors, all shapes, all sizes. So I know there's much more out there than maybe what's put out front as being representative of like the best of Black America.
Yeah, thank you for those responses. Yeah, definitely, I agree. Like, I think I've experienced colorism before, but like, you know, like, but I feel like it's more on a level where like I kind of just didn't want to acknowledge it, you know, because like it just didn't want to like, you know, make like other people feel like uncomfortable, I guess. But like I've seen like, you know, people say stuff to me that, you know, is I deem colorist. And but yeah, I just like, you know, didn't want to, you know, mess stuff up. And I do think it happens. Like, I feel like it's also like, it does happen a lot for like Black people. Like sometimes I feel like in like families, and it happens in like, just like with like, especially going to like a predominantly white school and like, you know, having, being around other Black kids who maybe sometimes like, I don't know how to describe it, like don't identify as Black, you know, it's rough. But yeah, but I feel like, yeah, it's definitely something of that nature. So, but thank you guys for sharing your input on that question. It really means a lot. And then, so I had another question, which was, do you think that colorism affects Black women in terms of who they are able to date or who they can like, who they think they can go out with? And what's your take on that?
Well, I think I addressed a little bit of that earlier, but I do think that it does have an impact on who Black women feel that they can date. Well, and I think that as my sister Stephanie mentioned, I mean, social media, television, which I think television has always kind of held that bar of in terms of Black people where we should be, like light is the right thing. And I feel like there was a period of time where that kind of changed. And when we went through like the 70s and 80s, I felt it was a lot different. And then it's kind of like we've come back around this corner where, like I said before, I think a lot of Black women don't necessarily feel like that they are chosen or can be chosen because there's so many messages out there, I feel now, that basically says, you know, the lighter or the closer to white that you can get, the certain kind of hair that you can get is what you want. And sometimes when you see our athletes, as Kamara talked about, people who are put in front, maybe our athletes, and then you see who they're with, you know, I think it can make some young Black girls think that, you know, I want to marry a Black man, but do I have that potential when I see certain Black men who are not choosing me? They're not choosing anyone who looks like me. They're not choosing anyone who has hair like me. And I think it's been wonderful to see our Black women embrace our natural hair, because for so long, that was like, you didn't want natural hair. You didn't want to have anything to do with it. And even that somehow has made some young people, young Black girls, subconscious, is that the word? About having natural hair, because it's not quote unquote straight hair, or it's not, you know, the hair that maybe is closer to being white. And so I do think that it does have an impact on some girls in terms of where they think they can go in their options.
Something else I think that's changed over the past probably 20 years even is that we even have a lot more mixed races now, a lot of, you know, and so because that I think is on the rise. Even if I am a male, if I'm a boy and I think I want to date someone that's Black, I can still date a mixed race young lady and still say I'm dating somebody Black, however they look closer to white or what have you. Oh, she's light skinned with that good hair, but she's still Black. So then, you know, I'm still, and so I think that what's different now, like when we came along, there weren't very many mixed race children that I can recall. But now there are many. So that in itself, I think, contributes to, I'm not saying necessarily in a bad way. I'm just saying that in addition to social media, would add another layer of when you're talking about options of who is out there to date. You know, that just is just something else I think that has shown to work against our darker skin Black girls and women.
Yeah, and I will say, Morgan, I think there's two parts to your question, because there's one about like you as a woman, who you feel is, how do you feel about yourself? So a certain level of your own self-confidence and like how you might feel. And that can be like having self-esteem is, I think, becoming increasingly difficult in society that we're in for a number of reasons for young women in particular, but I think for all folks. But there is it can be difficult to kind of believe in like what you have to offer, whether like your beauty, your skills, your talents, what have you, when you're not always seeing those images represented. And thankfully, we also are in a space where you can see more of a variety of like what you can be. But again, it still like requires you to have your own sense of self-worth. But on the flip side, it's important to have that representation, because then you also need other people to see you as someone of worth and of value. Because as much as you can say like, I'm great and I'm wonderful, if in society it's not like perpetuated that you're an object of desire, that you're an object of value, that you're an object of worth, you still are gonna have to constantly fight that fight or like make that case. And that's difficult. So it's color, you definitely plays into that role in a lot of different ways. And so it's even just more important to like have more images of what it means to be to be Black, to be a woman, to just be out there in the world, so that you can see that, hey, whether your hair is short, it's long, it's curly, it's straight, you're medium, you're dark, you're light, you're somewhere in between, you got freckles, you got like however you look, like those things are also like beautiful and attractive to someone. And if you are attracted to that, that's great too, because I do think there are a lot of people who feel like they can't express what they are attracted to because that's not deemed as like wanted in society based on what we see.
I think, Morgan, that's a very, like I said, it's a very complex subject matter because, there's dating and then there's the issue of colorism. And I think with the advent of social media, like what's being promoted, you have to look at who's promoting this. When you look at all these commercials since George Floyd incident, I've never seen this many commercials with, mixed race couples or just, the merger of that in the media. So, and when people kind of tap into the media, then they say, oh, this is what dating is. And you got online dating, you got all sources of dating. But I think at some point in time, it just comes down to who you like and who likes you. And if you're willing, see, some people are not willing to cross the color line. That's another issue within colorism, because again, you're not Black enough, you're dating outside your race. Are you really Black? You got dreads, you got your braids, but you're dating outside your race. So, people have to contend with, their own inner workings of who they are. Because you can be, I was a director of an African American Resource and Cultural Center for 22 years in a predominantly white institution with 15,000 majority students and 500 Black students. So again, in that environment, if they were in Mississippi at Jackson State, you might have a whole nother different dating experience. But when you're in a predominantly white institution and there's 200 or 300, that's a different kind of experience because you got to negotiate the dating experience, and then you got to worry about light skin, dark skin, this, that, and the other. So I think for, dating purposes of Black women, they have to decide what's comfortable for them and go with that. That's the self-esteem, that's the confidence, that's who you are, is what I've come to know. That because again, it's just not gonna, because you're light or dark, it's like, do I like this person? Are they a good person? Do they have the integrity? Is it someone we have the same interests? And I think society is kind of moving in that direction, and you can still be who you are. You understand me? You can be an African American historian and be married to someone outside of that, but that doesn't take away who you are. But I know it's but I wanted to get back when they, to answer this, the subject of people kind of like bullying, what my sister was talking about, when people bully someone because of their color. I hope you asked a question about solutions that we can do in the community. Because again, if we're really who we say we are, we shouldn't be doing that. But that's an esteem issue. If anybody bullies someone because of their color, their interest, that's wrong. So again, we have to look inside ourselves. And colorism doesn't have you don't get a medal like you're an expert. But again, why do we even have that in the first place, and why does it still exist? So that, I'd like to address that, maybe that was one of your other questions of what can we do as a community to kind of eradicate so that colorism is, I love my color. Maybe that's what colorism can become. I love whatever my color is, you see. So, yeah.
Okay, so yeah, that was like my next question. I was just gonna say like, how do you think the Black community can overcome colorism? And like, what solutions do you guys have or think that the Black community could implement?
Well, first, I think we need to do kind of what you're doing here today, educating ourselves and just being aware. And then really, having conversations about the impact of colorism, but also at the same time, just continuing to work, especially as it relates to young women, as we talked today, just empowering us to continue to be ourselves, to be confident. But I think just being able to, as Paula said, let's just don't do it. But I think some of it's been ingrained in us. And unfortunately, there are people who have families. I mean, our family, I've never felt that in our family, but I do know of people who have families where they do make a difference of color. People maybe have nicknames that, represents their color. And so it's just something I think also in our culture that we just have to begin to look at and question, why do we do this? And how we can move on and move through this. And I think that's one thing that we can just do is to talk about it.
I think what you're doing right now, having this presentation, can start a dialogue, a conversation around the issue in a positive way. Like Erica was saying, it doesn't mean that everybody's going to stop, bullying people or attacking people. But I think when you begin to open up the dialogue, what is colorism, to where one day it may not even be anything about colorism, it's about economic. In our society, sometimes we can get sidetracked on certain issues, particularly in the Black community, that really are impacting us, which is economic, getting our education, being the best we can be, having our, the intellect, the critical thinking, the problem solving. When you're representing, that's attractive to people. You'd be surprised how you draw people to you in a leadership role, and you can stand up and say, I'd like to address this issue. We need to talk about that. Because again, when people say Black love, or, we're woke and I got you, okay, then why are we having this issue over here? My queen, my sister, a queen doesn't really have to worry about, the men coming to her or to him. That shouldn't be a problem. The princess should be coming there. So again, it's like things that you can begin to open up the dialogue and be, like I said, let's get real. Let's just talk about it. Because again, these are issues, they've been here for a while, but now we don't want it to manifest into something that is divisive. That would be, I don't want, Black men would be divisive over color when we really are dealing with an economic issue in America, like partnership, partnering to come together, to build something, to build those foundations that we talk about. So, yeah. So I'm glad that you're doing this, presentation. To me, it's worthy of an A.
Yeah, I would agree. I am typically a person that is a glass half full kind of person. I'm a realist as well. What I found in some of the things that I've kind of researched, which was a little disappointing, but it's real, that I just like to share on this. When we start talking about how do we think we're doing as a community, do we think that we can do better? Some of the things that I read were a little concerning. More than ever, women of color are bleaching their skin. Okay. This is a billion dollar industry. Okay. So 77% of Nigerian women bleach their skin. So we're in Africa. Over half of women in Asia bleach their skin. So you're talking about $8 billion worldwide in 2020, even amid the COVID crisis. $2 billion alone in the US spent on bleaching products. So I'm saying all that to say is that this is a really big feat. Like when you start talking about colorism, that means that there are a lot of brown people who are trying to make their skin lighter because society is saying that that is more beautiful. today. Not just in the US, this is a worldwide problem. So I'm just saying, from a realistic perspective, anything can be overcome. I'm saying that this is a very big issue. So I'm really glad that you're doing this presentation, because more light needs to be shed on this subject. Just like people talk about body shaming, people talk about, there are a lot of subjects out there that people shed light on, and colorism is not one of those things that people talk about as much, but they should, because just on those numbers alone, it tells you this is a very big problem that's impacting us, like us ladies right here. They're on the phone, right? I mean, on this call. So I think more light needs to be shed on what is this? Why are we spending billions of dollars, even in the mid of a crisis, to do this? When my daughter went and she traveled to, to Africa, to Ghana, to your point, Kamira, that depending on what situation you're in, she was considered, light over there. I mean, here, she's kind of caramel color kind of man, but she was considered like that. And they were asking her, what do you use to bleach your skin? She was like, I don't bleach my skin. This was just a few years ago. They were looking for, despite the health concerns, there are health concerns that are out there for people bleaching their skin, and a lot of people are still doing it. So I'm saying all that to say, the realistic side of me says that this is a very big feat, and I don't really know the answers. I just know, like for me, when I mentor and I'm talking to young people, I think what I say to them is have the confidence when you hear things, stereotypes, or you hear something that sounds like it's a statement that is colorist, or correct it, self-correct it, say something, be confident enough to put in, because sometimes people make statements and they don't even realize the hurt that they're causing by making the statement that they're saying or the things that they're doing. Some people, like you said, this is a newer term. Some people don't even realize that it's colorism. So for me, I think it does start with conversations like this, but I believe it starts with representation, like Kamira said, and what's put out there. I think it starts with conversations when we're around people, to be able to have the confidence to speak up, to say, hey, no, don't do that. We get that enough from outside of our own culture. Don't do that inside of our culture. But you have to be able to check it then and have the confidence to say it then, despite, what the backlash may be, because it's a big feat, like I said, and it's a worldwide issue. So I appreciate you being able to have us come on to talk about it. And I'm looking forward to this being a subject that we do more and more, speaking on over the years.
And I think, as we say with racism in the past year with George Floyd and all that, people talk about call it out, colorism, call it out.
Call it out.
See it, call it out.
Okay, any other comments or
Yeah, no, I think they summed it up well. And I would say, like, I agree completely. It's like, there's things that you can do as an individual, and it really does start with like calling it out. So like looking at your own language and behavior that you might have that is unconsciously supporting colorism. Like, I know I make a lot of comments about Drake and his skin tone and all of his feelings. And so I have to name that. It's like, why am I making those associations? When really it's because he's a Scorpio, which has nothing to do with his race or his color. But you have to really just make sure that you're starting to do that for yourself. Or like when you see something, you're like, why is it that I gravitate towards someone that is of a particular skin? Is it because of their skin tones? Because of other things that like I've been incentivized or motivated to do? So it can be difficult. So like, it is a lot of your own internal work. It is naming it in like your friends, your family, your colleagues, your classmates, all of those things. But like the more you do it and the more you see it, the easier it is to do something about it. And it's also recognizing that, yes, as an individual, you can do things, but there's also these larger systems that, again, motivate and incentivize us to think that like white is right and black is bad, which is not true. it's absolutely not true. So then you have to understand that like, this is something that has been perpetuated, and it's something that has, you know, helped a very, very small group of people, and it's hurt a lot more. So what can you do by like naming and recognizing this to create a new system where everyone is able to be seen and valued for who they are?
Just on a end note, I would like to suggest, as in the words of the incomparable James Brown, say it loud, I'm Black and I'm proud. That might be, you know, that to me is, came into my generation, maybe we need to bring that back so that whatever color, shade, or whatever, pride, proud, say it loud. It can become, you know, a swan song for a movement. You know, like I said, you may not eradicate everything, but you can be the change that you want to see. Yeah. So thank you so much, Morgan, for inviting us and allowing us to share our thoughts this evening. We appreciate it. You did a great job at Notre Dame. Go Irish.
I'm not for sure who made this quote, but it was, if you see something, say something. Good job, Morgan.
Thank you guys. Thank you guys for coming on.
Thank you. Love you.
Love you guys. Thank you.